This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porque says cheated.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me, as always, is Aaron Campo and our engineer Lickett. This is the Mailbag episode for January 2025, kind of the preseason, I guess, edition of this. Training camp just opened this week, Aaron. Does it feel like we had much of a break? I guess you did. You didn't have to record at all for the last month.
Yeah, it's been nice. You know, I've played a lot of video games on Tuesday nights, in addition to every other night. So it's been good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good to have you back, Aaron. Good to
be back.
You know, good time for us to get back into things. It's every year, I guess I am a little thrown off by how short the off season is, but this one felt really short, in part because maybe a week at the most, there was a week where I didn't have something I needed to like write about. Like the best example of this was on New Year's Eve. I literally reached out to sources the day before New Year's Eve and said, hey, should I be ready to write something before the new year? And people were like, it doesn't look like anything's going to get done. And then all of a sudden, New Year's Eve, the Jesus Ferreira deal gets basically completed. And there I am doing a whole day of work. But
yeah,
this is the world in the content minds of Sounder at Heart.
That's right. Yeah. 24-hour news cycle, you know?
Exactly. Well, we're also doing this episode on video. I don't know if we're actually going to release it or not, but if we do, you can go on YouTube and check. There is a Sounder at Heart YouTube page. There's actually a lot of stuff on there. Not anything that's particularly new well, no, that's not true. There's some newer stuff, but we're going to try to do video. And if we are doing it, I apologize if I'm being fidgety or I just took off my hat. I'm now self-conscious about doing all these things. I have to like focus. This is going to be tough for me. And then who knows, maybe I'll botch it so badly we don't even release the video, but we're going to give it a go. We're going to give this a go.
We'll get there. We'll get there eventually. We'll get comfortable on camera.
Exactly. We'll get there eventually. Well, Aaron, you want to just start off, start firing away with these questions?
Yeah, let's do it. We got a bunch of them. So as always, apologies for having to cut some. I've got to go to bed, and I still have work to do before the night's out. So
yeah, I only slept like 2 hours last night, so I'm like running on fumes here.
Oh, you can't be doing that. It's not good.
It wasn't on purpose. Don't worry.
No, I know it never is. It never is. Not at this age, at least.
No.
So the first one is from Andrew. Is CCL/C somehow the best shot at a trophy in 2025? Club World Cup is Club World Cup. Leagues Cup and Open Cup, I expect they will either not be in these two or they will rotate so heavily they may as well not be in. Shield, they've never been serious contenders for the Shield under Schmetzer. In a year where they are potentially in 4 additional competitions, doesn't seem like the one where that will change. MLS Cup, I expect the team will be exhausted and probably playing mostly on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that your logic is wrong. I actually gave this a lot of thought, and I have to admit, I think Champions League is maybe not their best shot, because if they were to go out early in Champions League, that sort of changes the equations for these other things. Like if they don't go on a deep Champions League run, I don't know that the Leagues Cup and Open Cup issues are as acute. And then if they don't go on long runs in that, I think that they could still have a good MLS Cup run. But I do feel like Champions League is a worthwhile goal. It is a tough path for sure. They open with Antigua down in Guatemala. That's always going to be a challenge. And then most likely Cruz Azul will be waiting in the second round. And that's right there. That's a pretty good test for them. And I think there's at least one more, if not 2 more Liga MX teams that would be awaiting them if they advance beyond Cruz Azul. So it would be a challenge. But yeah, I mean, I think there's no reason they shouldn't go for it. I think they have a team that is built for a Champions League run.
Yeah, I think that they have as good a shot in CCL as they have in any year. Maybe not quite as good as the year they won it, but I think they have a very deep team. I think that this team has the potential to be better than the team that won it, frankly. But I'm not as bearish on, I guess, the MLS Cup chances. I don't expect this team to be a serious Shield contender, just because I expect somebody to just run away with it, as usually tends to be the case. Probably Miami again.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they're going to mostly be playing on the road necessarily. I think that they have a pretty good shot at a top 3 finish in the West.
You are more bearish, I think, is what you were saying. You're right. No, you're right.
I'm bearish. I'm bearish.
You said I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize.
So you got 2 hours of sleep last night. It's just fine. It's it's a common symptom of sleep deprivation is confusing large
getting
mammals.
bears and bulls mixed up.
Yeah. But I think this team is always a serious threat to win the MLS Cup when they get to the playoffs. I just think that they are extremely good at knockout soccer. And I think the odds are they're going to be a better team next year than they were this year. They've filled, I think, their biggest hole as a team. And, I take the point that they're going to have a lot of miles on the legs at the end of the year. But I think by the time the playoffs roll around, a lot of that fixture congestion is kind of in the rearview mirror and has been for a little bit. So I think that they've got a better shot at winning MLS Cup than they do CONCACAF. And I'm not going to say I expect them to win MLS Cup, but I think they have as good a chance as anybody in the league.
Yeah, I won't disagree with you there. I will note we did a survey on Sounder at Heart, and this feels like a good time to sort of bring that use that for content here. And, we got about almost exactly 500 responses to this thing. So a decent sample size. We posted it on Blue Sky. We posted it on Twitter. We posted it to Discord. We did not do a story on it, which I suppose would have increased the numbers and gotten us a different kind of sample. But my point being, we got a decent variety of types of people responding to this. And overwhelmingly, one of the questions we asked, how many trophies will the Sounders win? 53% said 1 trophy, which feels realistic. Which I found was interesting. About 68% thought the Sounders would win at least 1 trophy. Only 32% said they wouldn't win any, which I don't think is actually that inherently pessimistic to say you're not going to win a trophy. That's not although I think it speaks to the mindset of the fans, which I think it's more positive going into this year than it might seem coming from the general, if you're just on social media and you're reading Reddit or whatever. But all right, how do you think you say this person's name, Aaron?
Oof. maybe.
Oaf. Oh,
That's the best.
oh.
I don't think that's right, but that's the best.
That could
guess
be.
I
I mean,
have.
that's a good guess. But anyway, you know who you are, Discord user.
Auegh is
Yeah.
the spelling.
We'd love for you to let us know how to pronounce that in the future. But what quote unquote smaller signings are on your wish list still? Now, I will note that this question was submitted before the new year. But obviously everyone wants a big name DP, but added depth or smaller upgrades could really boost this on a team with 50 plus games this year. So where would you like to see this team prioritize the roster at this point? They don't have a lot of room to do anything, but what would you like to see them do?
Yeah, I mean, the things that I was hoping for that I think are in the spirit of the question going into the offseason were, hoping to see one new starting fullback next year. That seems unlikely. I mean, I think they would have to move one of them. I don't really expect Ariola to compete for a lot of time at right back, but I could see him playing right wing back in a 3 center back setup. But I do think that the Sounders are going to be playing with 2 center backs most of the time. So I think, the fullbacks are likely going to be who they are, which, is not the end of the world. There's going to be significant changes to the team, and that's really what I was hoping for. But, if there's a market for one of those guys and they have the opportunity to make a change there, I'd be certainly happy with that. But I think the general consensus and even sort of backed up by what the official line from the club has been and Craig Weibel has been is that it looks like we're probably going to see a U22 in the summer, and that's going to be the extent of it, I would say.
Yeah, and I think there's a genuine question as to what position they're even going to target right now. I if I had to guess, I think they are looking at a defensive midfielder. If you sort of try to read the tea leaves, they're talking about moving Josh Atencio to center back. They don't have a lot of depth at defensive midfielder, although they do have Snyder Brunel, they have João Paulo, they have Danny Leyva. All those players should be capable, or Snyder Brunel is not even technically on the roster yet. But they've got potentially options there. All right. This question is from, I'm going to go with Oaf, although I don't know if that's, I really don't know how to say this person's name. Auegh is how they're spelling it. I'm at a loss here, but if you want to tell us how to say your name in the future, we'd be more than happy to take that note.
I think Oaf is a pretty good guess, personally.
Well, I will add the caveat that this was a question that was submitted before the new year. So the roster is a lot more technically set than it was, but we were sort of moving in this direction all along. So I think it's still the spirit of the question is fair. But they want to know what smaller signings were on your wish list. Everyone probably wanted a big DP signing. So we're not necessarily asking, I don't think they're asking that. They specifically are not asking that. What else were you hoping to see?
Yeah, I think one of the big things I was hoping to see that it seems unlikely we'll see at this point was some significant change at one of the fullback spots. I think, Ariola is probably going to get some minutes at wingback, either on the right or the left, but I don't personally expect him to be really challenging for minutes at right back. I don't think he has a ton of minutes at an actual just right back spot in a back four. He's not a super great defender, I think it's probably fair to say. And that's, you can accept that at a wing back spot, not as much as at the right back spot. So it looks like we've got the right back or the fullbacks we have. But I think that the cap situation was maybe a little different than, we fully realized, especially with the changes they've made. They've got to be right up against it. And I think it seems like a U22 is the way it's going to be, and probably in the summer.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was hoping that we would get a new fullback. I think in reality, we probably have to settle for the hopeful emergence of Reed Baker Whiting as a regular starter, or at least challenging for starters minutes. And I don't know if that'll be on the left or on the right. It's definitely a interesting situation to watch. Travion Sousa, I would imagine, is a player who, if they do end up going with a 3-5-2, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he gets some minutes. I will note that in training, although the starting group seems to be lining up in a 4-2-3-1, the second group seems to be lining up in a 3-5-2 with Areola on one side and Sousa on the other. And so it could be, I do think we'll see that formation more. I just don't know, like you said, I don't know that the base starting formation is going to include different fullbacks. And I think that would have been fun to see. And and if we're reading the tea leaves, I do think the U22 will probably end up being a defensive midfielder. Probably the most significant change they're making this preseason is they seem to be really purposeful about trying to move Josh Atencio to center back. And I would imagine they want to backfill his role a little bit with a U22. So I don't know. We'll see. I think that's probably the areas I would have ideally. I mean, I will say I was hoping there would be a winger, and I have a hard time really complaining about if Areola is the type of winger they signed. This is a guy who's proven production in MLS. Not necessarily huge numbers, but in 2022, he had 10 goals and 7 assists. He was a regular starter for the U.S. national team for a while. So it's hard to be too, critical of that change as well. So I don't know. I think there wasn't as much change as I was expecting, but the change they made was, not insignificant.
Yeah, well, let's go a little further down that road, I guess, because the next one is from Alejandro. Assuming Areola and Ferreira are signed, which they are, this was again before the signings were official. What would you project the starting lineup to be and in what formation? Has this winter window been successful? And if not, what other moves would make it a successful winter window?
I still think they're going to start in a 4-2-3-1. It'll be interesting to see how long that sticks, because I don't know that a 4-2-3-1 perfectly fits all their best players in their best positions, but it does allow you to get your best players mostly on the field together. My suspicion is that you'll see Pedro de la Vega on the left and Ferreira on the right, Morris up top. I don't think Paul Areola is in that starting group. And that could become very fluid. I don't know how we haven't seen Ferreira's not been at training yet. It'll be interesting to see how him and Morris end up working together. If Ferreira wants to, is willing to be on the right even, or, I mean, he says he is, so we'll see. But I think this has been a reasonably successful window. I would give it like a solid B. I'm not going to sit here and say it was an A, but they got 2 useful MLS proven players, one of whom I think has the potential to be an MVP type. I mean, if Jesus Ferreira comes in anything like the guy who played all of 2022 and the first half of 23, like the best scorer in MLS, and he's never played with a group as talented as the group he'll be playing with in Seattle. I think this sets up really well for him. So I wouldn't say I'm over the moon about this window, but I'm pretty positive about it.
I think too, the context of the position the Sounders were in is so important, because I think for the restrictions that they had, they did probably about as well as I could have expected. I think 4 or 5 months ago, we expected there to be 2 DP spots coming open.
Yeah.
We expected, I think, at least one pretty significant signing. And that's not going to happen. And I think that that's frustrating for a lot of people. And I think that's totally understandable. But I think ultimately the choice was, do we let Rusnak walk and go make a splashy signing and hope that they hit the ground running right away? Or do we bring back the guy who, had one of the best counting numbers seasons of any playmaker we've ever had, who, was sort of had the offense humming pretty well down the stretch, and add some talent around him with a lot of upside. And I think that that's a totally defensible choice. I think it's also defensible to say they should have gone with more upside and tried to inject a little bit more enthusiasm, into the fan base. I think that's a totally defensible position. But I do think that bringing Rusnak back is completely defensible on competitive grounds as well. And I think a TAM player who was a DP 2 weeks ago, who I think has the potential to be like you said, an MVP caliber player, assuming, he hasn't just been totally changed by injury. And there's a lot of reason when you look at his underlying numbers to think that he hasn't been, and that a lot of it has just been him playing in different positions and him being kind of unlucky. I think that that's the kind of, low risk, high reward signing that makes a lot of sense to make in this situation. So the alternative, right, is going out and spending a couple of $1 million on a guy that's going to be a max TAM player who's probably not going to be as good. So I think that they've done pretty well so far, for sure.
I just want to dig in a little bit on the Albert Rusnak thing, because I think I definitely understand where you're coming from, and I would even agree with you. I think there's an argument to be made that it would have been that it was worth letting Rusnak walk and gambling on being able to find a better, higher ceiling improvement.
Yeah.
But I do come back to this idea that that's a huge, it's a really big risk. And I feel like we've maybe undersold the risk that is involved in that. Because let's just say you go out and spend $5, even $7 million. There are a lot of players that have come into this league on that kind of number who didn't hit the ground running, who struggled in their first season or two. I mean, heck, you can just look down the road at Evander. He was a guy who came in at $10 million, and he really wasn't very good his first season. No, he was an MVP candidate his second season, but those are, that's a risk you take. And I'm struggling to think of an example of a player who had a season like Rusnak did, and then the team was just like, thanks, see ya.
I know. Yeah.
It's really hard to imagine just letting him walk. I mean, I suppose you could have played hardball with him and just said, hey, we're just not willing to bring you back as a DP. And the Sounders did offer him a non-DP contract that would have, guaranteed him more years. But I do think that we've maybe in the discourse allowed that idea of just letting Rusnak walk become sort of this real possibility, when I don't know that there's any team, no matter how ambitious they are, is just looking at 30 goal contributions and being like, yeah, we know you're 30, which is, not an age where we would expect you to drop off, but we really don't believe in you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think the only way that it makes sense is if you have a transformative player that you can get,
right?
And if short of that, I think it's a combination of people not actually appreciating how good Rusnak is and how hard to do a lot of the things he's really good at doing are, and how hard it is to find those players. He's not the most exciting player in the world, but he's insanely good at the things he's good at, and they are important to the way the Sounders play. But also, just like you said, even players that come good take a long time to adjust sometimes.
Right.
And a lot of players never come good. And it's just, people talk about how they can, go into next season with Rusnak as a DP when it's such an important season. And I think it's just as easy to say, how could you let that guy walk and go into the season with an unknown, because it's such an important season. I think, that my initial reaction when I found out that Rusnak and Morris were going to be DPs next year was not super positive, but just having some time to think about it and talking through it and looking at some of the numbers, I think they made the right call competitively and from a continuity standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I come down. I know it's not the sexy answer, it's not the headline drawing answer, but and we can, I suppose, I don't really not that interested in digging up the whole Jordan Morris thing, but the reality is that both of them played at DP levels. They both deserve to be on DP contracts, and it's not really fair to sort of second guess that too hard, given how well they both played. But all right, well, let's move on. This is from B Sweets. Would you predict to be what would you predict to be the net impact and personal response to the Sounders moving out of downtown and or MLS moving to a winter schedule? Two very different questions, but kind of related, I suppose.
Yeah. For me, if they move out of downtown, I will go to fewer games for sure. I have sort of come to accept that they have to get a better stadium situation and that the current situation at Lumen is untenable. And I don't feel like First and Goal is going to be just all of a sudden become a better partner. Better partner. So, I'm still holding out hope that they can find a site in the city, ideally in downtown, although that seems like a really tall order. But yeah, I mean, if they move to Long Acres, I'm just straight up not going to go to as many games, and it sucks. It's a bummer, but I'll understand, whereas I think a year ago, I would have been much less understanding. I personally, though, would love them to move to a winter schedule. I know that that's unpopular for a lot of reasons for a lot of people. I think competitively, it makes a lot of sense for MLS to be on the same schedule as the rest of not the rest of the world, but most of the rest of the relevant soccer world. I think that it would be helpful for them to be on the same calendar. Having losing the restrictions with international windows would be pretty nice, I think.
I mean, playing championship games in the summer or in the spring, I'm sorry, would be pretty sweet.
It would be. I mean, that's a kind of a dead spot in the sports calendar. People talk about, oh, well, then MLS is going to try to compete with the NFL. Well, yeah, for like a month or two, they're already doing that,
right?
And they're doing it at a time when the NFL is sort of at its most intense. So I don't really know. I mean, MLS Cup was the same weekend as the SEC, the same time as the SEC title game, and got absolutely stomped in the ratings because of it. So, and I like having summers without a lot of obligations. It's nice to have a summer weekend, like a Saturday night where I don't have to make time to watch Sounders game.
I wouldn't hate that. I would not hate that at all.
But it's also it's nice. Sorry, last thing. It is nice to stand outside in July and watch the Sounders too. So I totally get that.
Sure,
that as well.
I will just, one of the things about that is I think the Sounders would be well positioned actually in a move to a European style schedule, because I think fans are a little bit more tolerant here of probably going to cold weather games. Like I don't necessarily think that Seattle fans would be turned off by having to watch soccer in January or whatever the season runs. But I think as far as the stadium goes, I think the way I'm coming down on this is I don't know if I'm that interested in talking about it until like we have renderings at this point. Like I think the idea, I'm with you. Where we are right now, I don't think I would be excited about going out to Long Acres. I go out there all the time as it is for training. I don't know that I would and I suspect that the atmosphere would take a hit in some ways, but I also think it's a little hard to fairly project what that experience is going to be like, because right now it's so far away from being a stadium. Like there's no infrastructure there that would support a stadium. But once you start putting renderings together and you start drawing it up, and maybe there's a whole neighborhood built up around it or whatever, like, and sure, that will be fake and it will be, kind of downtown Disney kind of thing, but it could be kind of cool. So I don't know. I think I'm going to reserve a little bit of judgment, but I will say I'm starting from a skeptical point at the very least.
Yeah, that's fair. It's also, I mean, Sounders have a lease through 2032 at Lumen, so there's some time to figure it out.
We've got a few years.
Maybe Adrian will win the Mega Millions and he can, buy something in Soto. Next one is from Ken W. And again, I guess the standard caveat: this question was asked before the news about Jordan Morris becoming a DP was public. So I'm going to amend the timeline of the question. If the team has not signed an external DP, Ken's original question was by the end of next summer's transfer window. I think it's fair to say by the end of the winter 2020 Yeah, so 2026, right? That's when they'd have expiring contracts, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, there's potential. Next season, they can potentially sign a new DP if they wanted to.
Right after
they won't have any expiring contracts, but they could definitely create. They could create an opening if they wanted to.
Yeah, I was thinking after Rusnak and Morris's contract expire.
Well, that would be 2027.
2027, right?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So I mean, potentially we've got 2 more years. Like that's, and I think that is one of the things that people were having a visceral reaction to. Is it wasn't just that it was Pedro, Albert, and Jordan. It was that this is our DP group for 2 more seasons. And in talking to the Sounders, I don't know that it's quite that dialed in. Jordan is likely a DP through that time. Albert is probably a DP, but I do think there are ways if they wanted to get out of Pedro's contract. I think they're probably a little bit more. I think they could probably move him if he's not performing at a DP level, or if he's really playing well. That's another possibility. Maybe he's playing really well and he kind of plays himself out. But I don't think they are quite as set in stone for 2026 as it might look right now.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a tough question, I guess, to answer given what we know now versus when it was asked. But I think, yeah. So whatever time frame you think makes sense, I guess.
Well, here, I'll say, this is what I'll say. I think this is maybe answering the spirit of the question. If we go into 2026 and it's obvious that we are not getting production out of our 3 DP spots and the Sounders make a choice to just let it ride, that definitely says something about ownership's willingness to spend, because they could, I think they will have the ability to open up one of those DP spots if they wanted to, if it was that important to them. And, so we'll see.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. And I think the odds are actually pretty good that Pedro is going to be worth his money next year, worth the spot. So hopefully it's not really a question until 2027. Hopefully Albert and Jordan continue to play really well, and Pedro starts to contribute at a level that justifies his DP tag, and it's a question for 2 years from now.
Right.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
This is from Cascadian Frontier. Does locking up all the DPs make it less likely we sell Obed? Seems there might be less urgency on the part of the club to get the cash if they can't turn around and turn it into a big signing.
I don't think it makes it any less likely at all. Money is money, and they still have to spend it on the squad. They can sock that money away into an interest-bearing savings account and, wait a couple of years, and they've got all sorts of options there. But I don't think, I think Obed is going to want to leave. I think he has his sights rightfully set on bigger and better things. And yeah.
And I will say they just made some changes to the allocation money rule like the other day that there's no expiration now. So the Sounders, if they were to sell Obed, let's just say for $10 million and they wanted to convert 3 million of that into GAM, they wouldn't have to just turn around and spend it. But of course, the cash that's there to go out and spend on a DP, I mean, I guess that's the whole point, right? Is they would have money to spend on a DP. And that would just, like you said, it just goes in the bank. There's no reason that they can't spend it. Yeah. And they might have, more signings to make between now and then.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it makes it more palatable that if Pedro isn't doing well, you can sell him at a loss, or
exactly.
God forbid something happens and you need to buy out Albert or Jordan.
Right.
It just gives you so much more flexibility. Next one is from Funky Hef. With more competitions, meaning more and more matches per season, is MLS considering changing any roster and salary cap rules to allow more depth?
Well, it's funny that this is a good transition into this question, because among another thing that was in those new roster rules is now there are players who, I don't know how many people even knew this, but it used to be, at least for last year, that a homegrown player could be what was called an off roster player, meaning they were on an MLS contract, they were paid like an MLS player, but they were not eligible to play on the game day roster unless they were on a short-term loan. But conversely, they wouldn't count toward the roster total. So you could have an almost unlimited number of off-roster homegrown players. Stuart Hawkins was an example of this last year, and he eventually did get put on the senior roster at the end of the season, but most of the season he spent as an off-roster player. And so what this rule, though, changes is that those off-roster players can play in 6 league games and unlimited CONCACAF Champions Cup, Leagues Cup, Open Cup games without having to go on a short-term loan. So that's a pretty big change. And it allows, so all of a sudden the Sounders could go, maybe they signed Snyder Burnell. They could put Leo Burney on that spot. They have ways of opening up roster spots now, and they can extend the roster, especially if they only think these guys are going to play a handful of games anyway. So yeah, they are sort of making these changes, and that is, they're not adding a whole bunch of high paid players on the roster, but they are extending the roster to make it easier to play in multiple competitions.
Yeah, and I think too that some of the last CBA changes were anticipating some of this as well, because the players got some pretty decent concessions, and so I do think that they're kind of thinking ahead a lot of the time with this stuff, rather than being reactive.
This is from Good Looking. Assuming Obed is sold in the summer, how does the team adjust tactically? Do they just plug and play Atencio or something else?
Yeah, I mean, seems like no now.
Right. That was the obvious. That was sort of the obvious answer before, up until recently.
Yeah, it definitely makes a lot more sense that JP was brought back to me now. That the plan is to convert Atencio to center back, and I think we talked about defensive midfield looking like a spot that they might target for a U22, and you maybe don't. It's not ideal to have a U22 coming in with the expectation that they're going to get a lot of minutes right away, but that might be the case, right? But the other thing to keep in mind is that this is the cap situation now. These are the guys on the roster now. If they get up Schitt's Creek, they can make changes. They can trade guys. Right. They can do things to give themselves flexibility. Also,
especially if they sell Obed, a $10 million kitty sitting around waiting to be spent.
Yeah, and if you convert $3 million of that to allocation money, you've got a lot more salary cap all of a sudden. That gives you flexibility. Right. So, obviously they're not going to use all $3 million of that to buy down cap hits, but they could probably add a pretty decent player if they wanted to with a chunk of that money. So,
for sure.
Yeah. Next one is from Aaron R, and it's another Obed question. If when he moves, in what league do you see him landing? Any rumors of specific clubs inquiring about him?
So most of the specific rumors we've heard have been coming out of Mexico. So Club America has been linked to him. Monterrey has been linked to him. Those are two of the biggest clubs in Liga MX. I don't think he is thinking he wants to go to Mexico. I don't think the Sounders would prefer to sell him to Mexico. I think the Sounders would much prefer for a bigger European team to come in and make a bid. I know his personal desire would, like, his boyhood club was rooting for Atletico Madrid. I don't know if that's in the cards, but I haven't heard any specific rumors about European interest. I won't be surprised if we start hearing some, though. He is a really, really good player. I suspect he'll end up in Europe. If not now, then eventually. But so I guess that's where I'm still gonna say that it's gonna be somewhere in Europe, but I don't know where exactly.
Yeah, I think if you have dreams of playing in Europe, going to Mexico is maybe the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, that's not you're not any closer to Europe if you go to Mexico. That's for sure.
Yeah, probably further away, frankly.
Right. Yeah. This is from Debate Pro. Should Brian be giving Reed Baker Whiting more opportunities to play by deploying him as an occasional right back? It seems odd with Alex's struggles not to use Reed on the right.
I think that Reed is still in the phase of his development where you play him where you want him to end up. And I think, although, maybe he's coming out of that a little bit, but I think that left backs are harder to find and are more valuable than right backs. Reed is right footed, but he's very good with his left foot. He can play on the left pretty effectively. I think the odds are he's going to end up playing on the right, deeper into his career, but I don't blame the Sounders for hoping that he can play, more on the left. So yeah, I think he's going to get a lot of minutes this year, assuming he stays healthy. This is a big year for him.
Yeah, I mean,
I think he's still going to go have a pretty good career in a higher league than MLS, but I think the odds of him making an Obed type move have taken a pretty big hit after last year. So, but yeah, he needs to play. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him play on the right, but I think there's going to be a decent amount of minutes on the left. I mean, who's not going to be a left wing back in a 3-5-2? So yeah, I think he's going to get his minutes for sure. Next one is from.
I don't really, and I won't say I don't think I have a lot to say there other than I think we will see Reed playing some right back as well. But it's like you said, it's a big year for him. He's also going into he's going to be out of contract. So the Sounders also have a lot of motivation to want to get him signed before we get to mid-year.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one is from Bill Jones TRPT. What are the chances that the Whitecaps franchise leaves Vancouver? I know the team's for sale and some Vancouver residents seem worried.
It does. I can't blame anyone for being worried. I would be pretty surprised if they move. I don't think there are any other North American markets that to me on paper look more enticing. Like you could certainly argue that the Whitecaps need to get their own stadium. As bad as the Sounders situation is at Lumen, or as frustrating as I should say as it is at Lumen, the Whitecaps way worse at BC Place. They couldn't even host a playoff game last year. They weren't. If they had made it to MLS Cup, they wouldn't have been able to host that even. So that's a real problem. So I suppose, and I would imagine building a new stadium in Vancouver is not easy. So these are legitimate problems that a new owner will have to deal with. But you can't convince me that Las Vegas is a better market for an MLS team than Vancouver. I mean, I think Vancouver is the biggest sleeping giant in MLS in terms of its potential to be a real soccer town. And I mean, It is a real soccer town, and just that to be a real Whitecaps town, I should say. So I would hope that a new owner just sort of doubles down on Vancouver because it is a great soccer city, I think.
Yeah, I think too the league is going to frown at any attempts to move clubs because they don't get expansion fees.
Right.
If you buy the Whitecaps and move it to Vegas, then MLS doesn't get to give a team to Vegas and get a bunch of money for
exactly.
it. So,
$1 billion expansion team or whatever.
Yeah, I just hope that the Villa's owners don't get a team in Vegas. That would be super annoying. This one's from Dudesby. Would you say that the higher dollar and DP contracts are more staggered or grouped to end together? Having top player contracts expire in different years might allow teams more ability to change when needed. Having contracts all expire closer together might hint at a strategy of holding core together.
I guess, are they saying should that be the strategy, or is it better to I mean, it's probably better to stagger them, I suppose.
Yeah. Or is it an intentional strategy? Maybe is kind of how I read it.
I don't think it's I don't know. I'm skeptical that it's intentional. I think they I think they're signing each of these contracts effectively as they come. I don't think they're giving one guy a 3-year extension and another guy a 2-year extension just so that they don't end up expiring the same year.
I do think that it's probably not an accident that Jordan's DP escalation came up the year after that Raul's contract expired. I think
That's
seems,
that's probably true.
And Ferreira, if he has a similar escalation, it's probably timed with Rusnak, his deal coming up.
That's true.
But yeah.
No,
I
that's a good
generally
point.
I don't think Nico and Raul's contracts were staggered intentionally or not, right? I think it was just those were the deals that got negotiated,
Yeah. This is an interesting thought exercise from Dan P. He says, has there been a DP signing this offseason from another MLS club that looks better than Jesus on a TAM? I.e., are there any other teams having off seasons that you're really jealous of?
Yeah, it is a good question because it's not necessarily a question about do you think Jesus is a better player than Denki, for example? But do you think that Jesus is a better value? And I think so. I mean, people have gotten really sick of this hypothetical, but I think it's a valid one. If Jesus was the exact same guy, but he had been playing in Belgium since he was, a kid, and he was coming over for $8 million or $10 million or whatever it was, would the reaction be different? And I think it absolutely would. Even with the risk, the downside, the injury, maybe dragging his numbers down last year. So yeah, I think that there is some lack of, excitement about Jesus's upside. But I think I would probably rather have Dinky. But as a value prop, I mean, the Sounders weren't going to sign a DP, right? They decided they were going to bring Rusnak back, and we've talked about that and how that's a defensible position. And I think value for money, yeah. I think I'd rather have Jesus on TAM than any of the other DPs that have been signed this offseason so far.
And I look at, it's early in the offseason. I don't even think technically the transfer window might not even be open yet. And so things can change a lot. Like a lot. But where we're sitting right now, I don't know that anyone has had even remotely as good of an offseason as the Sounders. Now, that's also understanding that the Sounders have kind of emptied their chamber almost on it. It's not quite, but they've made their big moves of this offseason. And so it's not a real apples to apples comparison. But if you look at, let's look at FC Cincinnati right now. They have Kevin Denke. Great. That's really good. Luciano Acosta did not report to camp. Oriano did not report to camp. Those are big problems for them that they're going to have to solve. And where we're sitting again, it's January 14th. This is not, we might be singing a very different tune on February 14th, but where we're sitting right now, no, I'm not jealous of anyone else's off season. It would be fun to sign a Kevin Denke type player. It's really fun to watch what Atlanta is like. Some of the names that Atlanta is getting linked to, that's a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong, but they haven't done anything yet, or they haven't made their big moves yet. So, where we are right now, come back and I guess maybe ask me this question in a month and we'll see.
Right. And that's the key thing, right? Is that Atlanta is in a position to make all these signings because they have sucked shit and they have a ton of cap space, and they have to get better fast because there's a lot of pressure on the leadership of that club to get better fast. Right. Cincinnati, like you said, they're losing key guys left and right. So they have to replace guys. The Sounders aren't in a position to have to do that. And it does make things less exciting, but it's, I think, ultimately kind of a good problem to have.
Kimberly 23 wants to know, or I guess I messed up here. This was supposed to be your question, but who's your breakout player of 2025?
Pedro. I think Pedro's going to hit the ground running. I think he's going to have a really good season. When I looked at what Ricky Puig did his first couple of years in MLS, when I looked at, like you said, Evander earlier, I think it's really not uncommon for guys to struggle really badly in their first season, especially when there are injuries. And I think, I'm pretty excited for what he can do this year.
Just to be different, I'm gonna say Jesus Ferreira. I think he has a big season potentially in him. I would say for him to have a breakout season, it'd probably have to be at least 25, maybe even 30 goal contributions. So I think he's got that potential. So Sure.
Yeah.
Won't we go with that?
The upside of this team, I think if they hit their 90th percentile upside or above, it'll be the best Sounders team that there ever has been.
Yeah.
They might
I think
not.
we've kind of
right?
talked ourselves into believing that this roster is not as talented as it really is.
Yeah. Next one's from Taco Core. If the Jesus Ariola deals happened a year ago, would it have been more or less likely that Jordan or Rusnak would have hit their target numbers to earn DP status? Now, Rusnak was a DP and was re-signed as a DP. There were no escalations. But maybe
would
the
you
question
put
is
together a season that
right.
was DP caliber, I guess is the...
Yeah, fair enough. Do more legit attacking pieces spread the wealth on goal contributions, or would a more dynamic offense accelerate their production?
You know, if this was a team that scored 65 goals last year, you start to ask questions like, well, there's only one goal. There's only one ball. You know, where is it? You know, that whole, you know, with basketball, this becomes an issue where it's like, you only put 5 guys on the field. I think in a situation like this, I think it raises it expands the pool of goals to go around. I don't necessarily think that because they, you know, Jesus Ferreira had what was it? I think 11 goal contributions, and Ariola maybe had 12 goal contributions. I don't necessarily think that means the Sounders are going to have 23 more goals. It's not outside the realm of possibility. I think that they're gonna. I don't think it's a spreading the wealth situation. I think there's going to be more goals. That's what I think the net impact is going to be.
Agree, and I think too, much like we talk ourselves into thinking this team is maybe less talented than they are. I think that the degree to which the attack, especially in the second half of the season, was bad is really overstated. If the Sounders add 11 goal contributions, let's just say Ariola doesn't do anything and Jesus has a repeat of last season, which everybody considers to have been really disappointing, they would have scored 1 goal fewer than LAFC scored last year. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, no question there. But you know, I think that having that other threat, that other credible goal threat, I think is going to take the pressure off of Jordan, take some pressure off of Rusnak, and just make everyone better.
Yeah, and one more thing I'll add about the conversation about their offense last year is for the second half of the season, like you said, they played fine offensively. They averaged something like 1.75 goals a game. Like not necessarily gangbusters, but that's a solid clip. And then in the playoffs, it dried up. I get it. Rothrock was hurt, you know, and it seems funny to say it now, but, you know, Rothrock was a key part of their offense. Jordan missed a game. Albert missed a game. And we're really talking about a small sample size. We're talking about 4 games. So I think I'm hesitant to read too much into their struggles when they had long stretches of being very good offensively.
Yep.
All right. This one's from Ty. What formation could we possibly see that includes all 3 DPs and Jesus? Is Pedro on the bench if he's healthy? It doesn't make a ton of sense, but he's the odd man out in a big. Is he the odd man out in a big game?
I mean, I think that the 4-2-3-1 with Jordan up top and Pedro and Jesus on the wings, Rusnak as the 10 is, you know, the easiest way. It gets trickier if you are playing with 3 center backs, because then either Pedro is a wing back or Albert plays much deeper. You know, I mean, maybe that's the answer, right? When Obed leaves, is Rusnak slides deeper and Pedro plays at the 10. I doubt it, but it's a possibility. I think you could see 2 striker setups. You know, I think you could see a 4-4-2 where they managed to get all of them on the field, like a diamond type 4-4-2.
Yeah. I suppose there's a way you might be able to work it where, well, that would be pretty tough. I was going to say you might be able to work it where you have like a 3-man back line and sort of like a box midfield. But
yeah,
that would be tough to fit all the players. Like I did come up with some formations, but you sort of, in order to get all of them on the field in a 3-back, you really need De La Vega to be sort of a wing back, which I don't know how likely that is.
Yeah, but I think you could see a box 4-4-2 as well, right? I think that's totally feasible to see.
Yeah, yeah.
Last one from the Joshua. Do players actually live in the Seattle area when they are Sounders? Does that mean like De La Vega live in the area? Does that mean Jesus and Paul will move? I'm curious if that is the case generally. And then we did get some clarification on this.
Yeah.
Basically, they're asking, do they take up residence or are they just kind of in a hotel for the duration of the season?
Yeah, as far as I know, nobody other than Oba sort of like did the long-term hotel thing. And most of these guys are at least renting condos, if not full-blown buying houses. Most of the players at this point, the Sounders have a lot of guys who have been here for a long time. And I would guess that there are only 1 or 2 players who aren't considering this their main base of operations. Does that mean that Jesus Ferreira is going to move here and look to buy a house right away? Probably not. Paul Arriola, maybe not either. But at the same time, Will Bruin came here and bought a house within the first year he was here. So it's not unprecedented where they'll actually do something like that. But yeah, I mean, most of the players basically call it home. I mean, this is a 10-month season, basically. 11-month season, really, if you include preseason. And they just don't have the ability to not move here. I mean, that's
you're gonna be here if you've got a family. I would imagine you're gonna want them to be here as well. I think maybe if you're like a veteran journeyman, and you're not expecting to be here for longer than a year, you tell the kids to stay put. But and even in that situation, you're gonna be renting a condo or something, I would guess.
Yeah. I will say most of the players at this point, I mean, it's always been this way. There's usually a few guys that live in Seattle, then everyone else lives either on the east side or sometimes closer to the training facility. I think currently Jackson and Paul might be the only 2 players who live in Seattle proper. I should probably investigate that a little bit more, but that's unfortunately the sad state of affairs as those things go.
I know that the Seahawks...
I think Alex actually lives in Georgetown, so there's another one.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. That's a cool place to live.
My sister actually sold him his house.
Oh wow, look at that. That's pretty cool. I know that the Seahawks basically had a blanket "you can't live in the city" rule.
Really?
Obviously, I don't know if they still have that, but they did. I once cleaned Sean Springs' house, and I found that out when I was doing that. And so maybe they don't have that rule anymore. But I wonder if the Sounders are sort of encourage the players to live outside of the city. I don't know.
I mean, it wouldn't be. I would be a little surprised if they did that, but I guess it wouldn't be the most outrageous thing in the world.
Yeah, but I would tell them to pound sand. I would live right in the middle of Capitol Hill if I had that kind of money.
I know. I was very sad when I found out that Jordan had left Fremont. He was kind of a neighbor of mine, and he moved to the east side, but that's how it goes.
Yeah.
Well, that's the show. As a reminder, if you're wondering where do we get all these questions from, they come from our Discord community. And if you're asking yourself, what the heck's a Discord community? Well, it's basically a message board, for lack of a better term, and you can get access to that by becoming a supporter or above member of Sounder at Heart. That's the $75 a year level. And if you want to get on there, it's a lot of fun. We keep adding more and more people every week, almost every day. It seems like there's new people joining it. So it's been entertaining, especially this off season. I feel like this off season was much more active than any other period that we've had.
Yeah.
But and then we'll come back. We'll probably have one more preseason mailbag. We are planning a few events. The big one, we're I don't know if I even officially told you this, Aaron. Y'all might be breaking news to you, but Fast Fashion is bringing back Craft Casual, which is the beer we did for YachtCon in 2021. And that's a collaboration with Stoop Brewing. And I think we're going to try to do a release party on the Friday before the season opener. So like February 21st at Fast Fashion in Soto. So put that on your calendar. It's not in stone yet, but that's what we're going to try to do. And we're going to maybe have some more things to do this preseason. But anyway, thanks for hanging out, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out as well. You did tell me that. I just realized I have a show that night at 9:00, so that's going to be we're gonna have to move it.
I guess so. Yeah,
no,
you're performing?
No, God, no. Are you kidding me?
Oh, you're going to like a concert?
Yeah, I'm going to a show. But okay. I can do both. I'll have time.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely figure that out. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again to Lick It for producing this. Thanks to Full Pool Wines for sponsoring us. I am Jeremiah Shan, signing off for Aaron Campo. This is Nos Arietes. Remember, you will never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.